This guy was Welcome. Welcome to this place where people have gathered in times of grief, gladness, and gratitude. Welcome to those of you here in the sanctuary and those of you viewing online. My name is Reverend Lara Cowton, and I serve as the Minister of Congregational Care here at Unity Church-Unitarian. We gather this day to mourn the death and to celebrate the life of Bertrand Poritsky. We are here to grieve with one another as we hold the reality of death close, while at the same time we are here to remember the exuberant and vital way that Bert lived his life, to recall once again all that he was and all that he remains to be to us. Whoever you are, whatever brings you here this afternoon to this service of remembrance, know that this gathering is a time for us to acknowledge that indeed joy and woe are woven fine. Today, through tears, laughter, memories, remembrances, we will bring Bert close to us once more. As is our tradition at Unity Church, we light a chalice, symbol of our faith. We light this chalice for the warmth of community, as this was a community for Bert. We light it for the fire of commitment, for the zeal which sparked within Bert for justice and for healing and for the hope of a better world. In the presence of life, we say no to death. And in the presence of death, let us say yes to life. In the eulogy for Eleanor Roosevelt, Adlai Stevenson said, "We are always saying goodbye to this world, always standing on the edge of loss, attempting to retrieve some meaning from the silence left behind. Although we do not claim to know what happens to us after we die, we do know that death itself comes to us all. This fact is what awakens us to the awareness that our lives are finite and numbered. It helps us to appreciate life differently, knowing that it will end. So we know that each of us will at some point in our lives grieve. There are some things that we know about grief, that there is no one straight path for it. Grief knows its own time and its own rhythm, and it will have its way with us. So do not judge yourselves or those around you, for we each will grieve in our own way. We feel things differently. There may be days of pure sadness and disorientation and dislocation. And as the author John O'Donohue writes, sorrow knows its ways better than we. And by that, he reminds us that grief, it ebbs and it flows, often ignoring our own busy lives and the pattern that we would choose for it. We also need to know that when we lose someone who is meaningful to us, who we love, who has mattered in our lives in some way, it can bring back every other loss that we have experienced and suffered. Layers and layers of grief that never really quite goes away. Each one we experience again, all of them. And so each of us grieves differently. We may need time to do it alone and in our own ways. We need also to return to our communities of friends and family. Just as villages return to the well so that they may quench their thirst in times of need, we need to seek out one another as a source of nourishment and strength in our times of grief. So today, in community, we gather at this well to hold each other and this family in the midst of loss, and to be reminded once again that life is indeed a precious and fragile gift. So let us receive the gifts of this day, the tears and the laughter, the memories, the joy, the song. Let us receive these gifts with our hearts open. May we join now in a moment of silence for your own remembrance, your own prayers, reflection, and meditation. We will gather our individual thoughts and feelings and lift into this sacred sanctuary space. May you please rise in body or in spirit and join in singing a hymn. Number 38 in the gray hymnals in front of you, Morning Has Broken.
In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. In the blueness of sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, when we are lost and sick at heart, when we have joys we yearn to share, so long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them.
Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds, the sweep of an easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, But I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
My earliest memory is of my father. It was a dark winter evening, just up the road in St. Paul, and he was shoveling the driveway. He was strong and stubborn, and for years insisted on shoveling rather than using a snowblower. I was 2, maybe 3, and frolicking around the snow when he called me over. Towering next to the garage was a giant snowbank, the bottom of which he had hollowed out into a cubby for me to explore. I crawled in. It felt palatial. The warm light from the house across the driveway sparkled on the crystalline snow like 1,000 tiny jewels. And I remember my whole body flooded with a sense of wonder. I recently learned that he had been trained as a paratrooper in the Army, which meant he jumped out of airplanes, like on purpose. I couldn't believe this. My dad, the judge, the cerebral overthinker who methodically considered every decision from what to wear to where to live, jumped out of freaking airplanes? Sure enough, my mom told me later that when he was younger, he liked to push himself to be a better version of himself, to overcome his fears and self-imposed limitations. My dad loved words and the art of a well-crafted sentence. He savored poetry from Robert Frost to Ogden Nash. When I was a tiny tot, I remember squealing in delight as he nailed the lyrical cadence of James, James, Morrison, Morrison, Weatherby, George Dupree, and his unwilling mother's antics in A.A. Milne's poem called Disobedience. As a judge, my dad was known as a man of integrity. He was committed not only to upholding the law, but to the institution of justice. He believed that law and justice were foundational to a healthy democracy, and his role in maintaining this was foundational to his identity. In some ways, with all that's going on in the world, it was a blessing that he was less aware in his final years. Before he became a judge, my dad was a lawyer, and he asked exceptionally good questions. Even when we were losing him to Alzheimer's, he would inquire about my life's work, my family, and ask a few minutes of incredibly insightful questions before we lost him again. Like so many men of his generation, my dad was brought up to deny his own emotional reality, as well as those of us around him. And while he tried to embody this stoicism and cause some collateral damage in the process, he eventually seemed to come to terms with the fact that he was a soft mushball who felt with his whole heart. We never talked about this, though in retrospect, there was many signs of it. We came here to Unity almost every Sunday for a while when I was a kid. When the services were over, organist Carl Witt would play a postlude. Usually these were jubilant celebrations, complex and manifold fugues, or bass-heavy contemplative odes that rumbled my innards. It was a time designated to just be. My dad would take off his glasses and he would rest his head in his hands. He would shut his eyes and he would take it in. It was amazing to see this brilliant intellectual so fully consumed and illuminated by the music. There is much more, but I'll leave it at this. Thank you, Dad, for all you taught me and all you shared.
Judge Bertrand, Bert, Leon Poritsky. Bert was born on October 28, 1934, in Schenectady, New York. And he died July 3rd, 2024, in St. Paul, Minnesota. We are gathered here today not because Bert has died, but because of a deeper, more meaningful truth that Bert has lived. And we are here to celebrate a life well lived. Bert was a loving husband and father and grandfather, a friend, a mentor, a soldier, a sailor, a musician, a judge, and an animal lover. raised by Hillel and Elizabeth Leon Poritsky, the youngest of 3 children. As a child, Bert broke his leg when a piano soundboard fell on him, and his mother summoned the strength to pull it off. And as a result, he did a regimen of push-ups and other back exercises daily for most of his life. When we think back to these formative experiences, I wonder how they shape who we become. Perhaps this was one. Bert graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Dartmouth College in 1956, then became a lieutenant in the Army, and after training as a paratrooper, his years of military training and service were evident throughout his life with his use of a radar blip character when writing $signs on checks. After moving to St. Paul and began to practice law, Bert started to raise a family and had 2 daughters, Janet and Lynn. I've heard that Bert had a very even temperament, that he never showed anger towards people, but he could swear a blue streak at inanimate objects. He hated chores and grumbled about them mightily, excoriating the trash can for becoming too full. He decided at some point to build a sailboat from a kit, turning the garage into a giant workshop filled with plastic parts and fiberglass resin. So often you might hear a clatter out of the garage, followed by a solid stream of florid cuss words. A neighborhood mother called at one point to complain about the foul language that her boys were picking up. Bert loved animals, and he always gave his cats, Phoebe and Amanda and Tanya and Jason and Boo and Gabe before them, a little affectionate pet. Apparently, Gabe drove him crazy, but he would still give him affectionate pets unless the cat had missed the litter box, and then one might hear a stream of cuss words. Those early family years were not always easy, and Bert found his balance by seeking out water to sail on and in his work. And whether it was his military training or his own character, Bert's nature was to approach life in an orderly, systematic way, whether in building things or problem solving, even in the way he appreciated music for its rhythm and balance, and in his relationships. Bert valued structure, which at times might have felt like a rigidity to some, but it was evidence to his qualities of being careful and deliberate and thoughtful, his gracious integrity. This led his life's path to becoming a highly respected judge, first on the Ramsey County Municipal Court and then the District Court, and then after retirement he continued to serve on the Minnesota State Court of Appeals. Judge Poritsky taught and authored books on law and is dearly remembered by colleagues from his time in the courts. He took his work very seriously and made very deliberate decisions about every case, thoughtful. Peg Marinon shared, he was certainly one of the brightest judges on the Minnesota bench, but also an all-around Renaissance man. He was a wonderful mentor to me, always balanced in his advice. We are all the richer for having known him. As a judge, Bert loved to perform weddings, which he led by saying, "A good relationship is like a dance." Joan Cochran shared, "What I'll treasure forever is decades of fascinating conversations over dinners or while sailing. His sharp wit, his wry sense of humor, and relentless inquisitiveness." Bert was an active member of Unity Church since 1963, finding many ways to be involved over 6 decades. He served for a time on the church's board of trustees with good friend Laurel Lane, who shared some remembrances for us today. Laurel writes, "Bert Poritsky, what a great guy. A great sailor, a bike rider, a great sport, friend, and all-around human being. Bert and I share the exact same birth date, October 28th, although a few years apart. Thus, we discovered many years ago at the now demolished Mr. Steakhouse restaurant on Snelling Avenue. Eric and I were there ready to eat my free birthday steak dinner, and to our delight, so was Bert. Thus beginning a long tradition of the 3 of us getting together, and soon thereafter, dear Nancy joined Bert and turned our reservation into 4. Laurel writes, "One favorite story, as I remember it, was with the not-to-be-named frequent Unity Church incognito bicycle riding group." Was there an acronym for that? Yeah. Bert, Eric, and I, along with 10 or so others, would drive to a rural southern Minnesota bike trailhead in the morning. Our group would bike all day, singing some Unity Church tunes and other old classics, and then have a celebratory dinner because we did it. On one of those trips, we ended up in a restaurant in Mankato, Minnesota. And well, the next day, on the way home, Bert discovered that he'd left his jacket on one of the front door hooks at the restaurant. But maybe not a very valuable jacket. So he wasn't going to drive back down there to get it. Might be gone anyway, he added. Fast forward a year later, and after meeting his yet-to-be wife, our wonderful Nancy, Bert drove the 2 of them down to Mankato on a date. There was the jacket, on the same hook where he had left it. A good luck charm for their new adventures in life. The love of classical music was a centerpiece to his life and the memory with Laurel and Eric. Bert and Nancy introduced Laurel and Eric and many others to the Lyra Baroque concerts. And thank you to the musicians here today because of Bert and for Bert. The concerts that were held in the home on Wellesley Avenue or at Sundon Hall, he loved and supported and delighted in these concerts. We were impressed by Bert's skills in building his own harpsichord. And later, we were impressed that they lived through a total kitchen remodel as well. All hands on deck were we, with invitations to sailing adventures on Lake Pepin. So many adventures. Sailing was a big part of Bert's life. Story goes that he courted Nancy on a sailboat on Lake Nokomis, which was really a test to see how she liked it or if she was seaworthy. Sailing was a deal breaker. Nancy became a sailor. He and Nancy traveled a lot, hiking in the Sierra, visiting friends and his sister and brother-in-law in Champaign-Urbana. They also ventured out to Scituate to visit his brother and sister-in-law. And they enjoyed sailing and taking the train, and they had a boat on Lake Pepin and built a little community there. And he also really loved music. And then as an adult, learned how to play the harpsichord and then built one. He loved going to live music events. And when the girls were little, the family would go to see Gilbert and Sullivan operettas at St. Catherine's. He was deeply supportive of the arts. And he and Nancy went to many concerts at the Minnesota Orchestra as well. And he loved to take photos of nature. He loved patterns in nature and in music. He was brilliant. He could remember anything. He had a systems understanding of the world and could read and recall things with patterns. He was curious about history and why people repeatedly made stupid mistakes. He loved being of service to his community. He was an introvert and had a subtle, bone-dry sense of humor. And he was self-deprecating, which may have belied some of his own very human, very complex insecurities. His friends would describe him as loyal and wise. Bertrand Leon Poritsky had a life filled with love, with heartache, with adventure, with creativity, finding his balance in the intricate working of wind on a finely tuned sail. He lived a life full of integrity, service, and joy. Sail on, Bert. Dear one, the wind is warm and gentle behind you. Amen. Will you please rise and join me in singing hymn number 21. This we know. All life is a gift. Bert's life was a gift. We will remember him for his wisdom, his dedication and inquisitive mind, his adventurous spirit, his commitment to serving his country and his community. In the days ahead, in Bert's honor, and in gratitude for the time left in your own life, bring joy and laughter into your day. Ride a bike somewhere new. Go for a sail. Meet up with friends. Listen intently with an open and steady heart. Live a life of integrity, service, and joy. Do this in Bert's memory, and it will become your shared legacy. Bert, we send you off with this blessing from an Apache tradition. May the sun bring you new energy by day. May the moon softly restore you by night. May the rain wash away your worries. May the breeze blow new strength into your being. May you walk gently through the world and know the beauty all the days of your life. Though we extinguish this flame, we know that the spark of life still burns within each of us, and we know that the light of Bert's life will continue to shine through us. In the spirit of love, we have gathered. In the spirit of love, let us depart.